It is the Beaver Banter Podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner. There's Ian Rivers, and we're joined once again with Alex Faber, a sports writer for the Bemidji Pioneer, covering the football team and the basketball teams and a little bit of prep stuff as well in the Bemidji area. Alex, once again, welcome to the program. It's been a good run to have you on the last few weeks.
Yeah, I can't say I thought I'd be making another football-based appearance after our last one or even the time before that, but here we are.
Yeah, we had you on before to kind of preview the tournament and that first round matchup going down against Angelo State. Bemidji State gets a big victory there. They go to Western Colorado last week, and I don't know what you guys were thinking, but through a lot of that game, I thought, you know what? We didn't expect them to get this far anyways. It's a good season. Everything, there's not much to look back on. Sometimes you just have those games where it looks like it stalls out, and then the big scoop and score to put them up late. Bemidji State hangs on for the win. I think we got to start with that play, guys. What was your reaction when you saw that scoop and score?
Well, I think you got to start like 2 plays before that when Western Colorado goes up by 11 with like 4 minutes to go in the game. And there's no audio, of course. So we're like, oh, well, shoot, it's over. Some of my roommates, actually college roommates, I live with my wife now, not with guys still, but they texted me and they said, what happened? Because I'm freaking out. And they're like, what do you mean? I turned it off. Yeah, they call a holding penalty on the touchdown that Western Colorado scores, call that play back, and then 2 plays later, the unthinkable happens. Like just the most dramatic ending. I see the ball squirt free and I'm like, oh, we might have a chance to, the offense had not been moving that well in that game. So I'm like, well, at least we got another chance now if we can land on this football. And I think it was who Gabe Ward, right?
Gabe Ward. Yep.
Gabe Ward picked it up and ran it back for a touchdown. Just unbelievable. They weren't able to get the 2-point conversion, which made the last couple of minutes there a little bit more stressful because, they can win with a field goal. But that play was just incredible. I think it was Stephen Hoffman who punched the ball out, and what an incredible play. Just it's going to go down there as maybe the biggest, most important play in Bemidji State football history.
I mean,
I think that's awesome, man.
I mean, yeah, I was pre-writing a little bit of my game recap, and after that turnover on downs, I think it was like a 4th down conversion kind of in their own territory. It was right around midfield. I was like, well, that was a good run, like anything can happen, but I start getting running, and like you said, then there's that touchdown. I was listening to the Beaver radio network as well, just because that audio was annoying me, and I was just like, you know what, let's get him on. So I heard about the holding call, and I was like, okay, there's still a chance. And then sure enough, like you said, Stephen Hoffman gets a hand on it. Of course, it's Stephen Hoffman, guy's playing some of the best ball of his life right now. It's incredible. And then Gabe Ward just kind of scoops it up and just keeps running. I talked to the defensive coordinator, Joe Ford, last night, and he said on the sidelines, he just kind of stopped. He was just like, it wasn't for him. It wasn't like exhilaration. It was just like, what just happened? It was just pure confusion. And then sure enough, he has to get his defense back right out on the field, because like you said, you go ahead and the defense has to hop right back out. So it is one of the most incredible plays I've seen in a while. It's definitely, I haven't been here long enough to say it's one of the best plays in BSU history, I don't think, but it's gotta be up there. I mean, that's ridiculous to seal an Elite 8 trip. Essentially, it was incredible.
For sure. It's the biggest win in program history. And it just feels like Bolte's had a ton of that in his time here. His first season when he was filling in as interim head coach, Bemidji State won their first ever postseason game with the Mineral Water Bowl, and then eventually working their way up to get into the postseason. And then they've never lost the first round postseason game. And every year it's been, okay, you win the first one. Okay, you lose the second one. Now it's and just through this whole process, it just felt like they've gotten better and better each year. They felt more prepared for these playoff games, and they get into that spot. And it was just a huge moment of a team that could have, we talked about, like you talked about, Ian, there was a touchdown scored 2 plays earlier. There's a good chance that the defense just goes, you know what? We just haven't, it's just not our day. Let's let them score. They're going to run out the clock. They're going to do what they need to do. And we're going to go home, and we're still going to say, hey, great season. But the fact that they kept playing and kept doing all that stuff, and the opportunity presented it, was just so awesome, and just speaks to how much we talked in seasons past about how the offense, had carried certain teams for Bemidji State, but this year this is, I mean, this has to be the best defensive showing of the year, just in terms of some of the things they were able to do. And I know that there's probably been some other ones here and there, but just for that moment to encapsulate that play is just kind of the defense putting the team on its back and putting Bemidji State in a position to do this. By the way, you talk about the no audio, and you talked about Alex listening to the call there from Kevin Reed of the Beaver Radio Network. If you guys see this on Twitter, where Gabriel Garcia on Twitter here, Gabriel Garcia, excuse me, Gabriel, I'm sorry for mispronouncing. I'm trying to read it quick here. Slapped the audio over the video for the call, and it's just perfection. Kevin did a great job on that call, pretty much feeling what we all felt on that one, and it was really cool that somebody took the time to put that together.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's always great on the call, and that moment was that made it that much better, I guess. Covering it there, is you just hear that, and I was like, oh my god, and he just loses it too. It was an entertaining game,
especially for how Kevin calls games. He's very calm, very cool, very composed, and it's great about him. It's one of his good features, and for him to, like, because he in that moment was just like, what is happening right now? How many times do you see a play like that and officials are like, oh nope, that play was dead, they just kept running? Like, it just, I mean, just an awesome play.
Yeah. I like what you said, CJ, too, about every year they've gotten to that second round game and it feels like they're improving. I mean, you look back at that first one, they had to play the Colorado School of Mines and they lost 55-6. They were really never in that game. Then the next season they come out, they play Angelo State, and they were in it for 3 quarters, and then things spiraled out of control. And they kind of got blown out in terms of box score watching. Last year, they definitely should have probably won that game. I think they played a lot better than Central Washington for a majority of the game. And then, of course, we talked about the last time Alex was on, that crazy drive that CW was able to do. But they were that much closer. And so it felt like this year was the year they were going to finally be able to get over the top. And honestly, you know, in the first half of this game, I mean, offensively, it was a struggle for most of the game. There was really 2 good offensive drives in this game, and those drives really worked really well. I mean, the second drive where Jaden Washington ended up in the end zone from Sam McGath, that was a really good drive. I mean, they just kind of went down the field. It looked like they had no prior offensive struggles all game. And then, of course, the big play to Bryce Peters in the end zone in the first quarter. But you get to halftime and, you know, you're on the back of that really emotional 4th down stop. You just goal line stand, you're getting the ball back. And then I think it was the first play, it was a safety. And you're like, oh my gosh, come on, man. What's going on? And you're worried because you're down 5 and you're only down 5, considering the fact you didn't play that well in the first half. That was a relief. But the worry for me was the defense has played so well already. And their one touchdown came off of was it a block punt, I believe, in a short field?
The punt, that was a weird play too. The punt went under Mantelli's legs, and he just kind of kicked it out of the end zone so it wouldn't be recovered, but it was ruled an illegal kick. So it was a spot of the foul, or not a spot of the foul. It was a dead ball, turnover on downs, but it was an illegal kick. So there was additional yardage that marched it all the way up to the end zone.
Yeah, again, it would have been nice. I mean, I know you were listening to the radio call, but for people who wanted to watch on ESPN Plus, a thing that was hyped up by the NCAA, we didn't get audio, which we were just all so confused on the Discord.
Yeah. So to go into halftime trailing and to say, all right, this is the highest stadium elevation for college football in the entirety of North America. This defense, I was like, I'm worried that they're going to be able to just run the ball. The defense's endurance isn't going to be that up. I'm sure they did some endurance training in the week to get ready for it, but there's only so much you can do when you're up that high in that elevation against a team that's kind of used to that. But that wasn't the case. I mean, there was one drive for Western Colorado in the second half, the 52-yard touchdown run that kind of, you're like, man, that's tough because the offense really hasn't performed well. But the offense came back out and just answered that touchdown immediately. And it was great to see. It was kind of a streaky game all around, I mean, for both teams. But the Beavers did what they needed to do, and they put themselves in a position to be there at the end of the game. And a lot of times that's all you have to do. You know, you look at the Minnesota Vikings over these last couple of seasons, and you can call it lucky, you can call it whatever you want. But when you're in positions to make plays to win games, and sometimes those plays don't get made. And that's why you lose a game. Maybe against Northern State, you could say that. Maybe against Minnesota State. You know, if they have one more successful play on that drive at the end of the game against Minnesota State, maybe they win that game. But in this game, they had that. and the fumble recovery, of course, being the biggest one. And it was a crazy, crazy way, because I myself, I never doubted this team for a second. I knew they were going to pull it out, definitely. But yeah, I was kind of in the same mindset as CJ, where it's like, all right, a month ago, I wouldn't have even told you that this team would be in the playoffs. And so I guess to get back there and to win yet another playoff game, it's totally, absolutely the best thing that this program could do in that first year after they kind of are proving the doubters wrong. We're not just a quarterback, right? It wasn't just this crazy quarterback that came in here, lifted us to playoff success. He's gone, and now we're going to be back to a 6-7 win team every single season. They are back in the playoffs, and I would never have predicted before the season started that this would have been the team over the last 4 years that finally broke through and got to the national quarterfinals. So I'm over the moon, for this performance and for the performance of the defense. Like CJ said earlier, in years past, this is not a defense that can make this team look like they are, but it's really turned around, especially over the last 2 seasons. It's very impressive.
Yeah. And, one last thing to add on is, there's just so many different inflection points throughout this game, right? As is most great games. You could point to 5 different things as being the turning point. Remember Bemidji State going for it on 4th down, not getting it, and feeling like, okay, well, that was the season, that was their drive, and that was it. And then, of course, it led to the scoop and score. But there were just so many times where it felt like this team is dead. The punt not going their way, the safety, and the defense just kept them in there. And the defense eventually, like the Thanos glove, just basically saying, very well, I'll do it myself, and getting the go-ahead score. This is huge. And now, Alex, it sets up a matchup with Minnesota State. And before we get into that, just kind of again, any interesting sound bites, any interesting tidbits? What have you kind of pulled away in that now that you've had a chance to decompress from the game, talk to some guys post game, and kind of have them decompress from that moment? What's been some of the takeaways as you've gotten to interact with the coaches and players?
Yeah, Bolte kind of focused on this too, and I thought it at the time too. I think one of the most impressive, the moment in the game I was most impressed. Obviously that Gabe Ward scoop score was spectacular, is an incredible play, but the most impressive series of plays was that drive, that scoring drive in the second half. Because that just felt like we can't move the ball all day. How are we going to score? And then, like you said, they kind of made it look easy, and they marched down, and that was kind of a must score. You're down by 2 possessions. You need to put something on the board. Your defense isn't going to score every single time, right? You need to do something. And then they just went right down there and did it. Bolte said today he was super impressed. And that's something with the defense has certainly been the highlight of the team this year, right? They're number 7 in the country right now in yards allowed per game. They're top 20 in a bunch of different categories. I tweeted that out today. Just a super impressive unit. But the offense has really been pretty timely at times. And time of possession too. According to the stats, they didn't get it this past week. Stats were a little odd on that game, but so it's not 100%. But they're pretty consistently having a high time possession. Obviously, it's going to help out the defense. And then Sam is good for kind of a crazy play a couple times a game, right? Like that 40-yard kind of missile down to Bubba Peters in the first half was huge. And the offense, it's had its quirks this year, but certainly I'm impressed when they're able to come out in the second half in a situation that you need to score, and they do. It's just, I don't know. There's a lot of factors in that win, and that was one of the ones that really stuck out to me. And then another aside, Gabe Ward is a super interesting story. I'm not going to talk too much because tomorrow, a little preview here, I have a story coming out about him. But he's a JUCO kid, right? And he transferred into the program, and he's grown a lot this year. Super interesting guy, and it's just kind of a plug and play guy in this defense, and he came up with the score. So it's just it was a bunch of different factors that came to it, but all in all, just like you said, a program defining win there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And overall, it's just such a euphoric game. I kind of thought like the offense, I wanted to see them try to run the ball a little bit more. I thought maybe they weren't, because I was off and on in the first half, kind of being able to actually sit down and watch the game like closely. So maybe they were, sometimes you try that and it's like beating your head against the wall and it's just not going to work, and you can tell, and they needed to abandon it. But in this game, I was like, man, kind of feels like they get one carry on first down and it doesn't go the way they want, and they just try to drop back and pass. And I think it was pretty windy that day, and you're up in the elevation, and Sam McGath, you mentioned it. He's got some Jameis Winston in him. I don't know if you guys watch Monday Night Football this week, but dude, Jameis, he makes some plays where you're like, this dude is nuts. Like, and then he comes back and he, throws a pretty bad interception. But Sam has done exactly what he's needed to do, and that's be good enough to not completely sink games at times this season. And the run game
plays like what we talked about, the touchdown pass. It's been a fun ride.
Right. He wasn't just standing. He made that play happen to Bubba Peters because he stepped up in the pocket, avoided the pressure, gave an extra couple of seconds for Bryce to find an opening in the back of the end zone. And then Bryce was able to go up and make a phenomenal catch, at the catch point like he's been doing all season. But yeah, I mean, the offense did just enough. Hopefully in a little bit more of a familiar territory now, going back to Mankato, they can get a little bit more going because, I think we'll need a little bit more offensive firepower than we had in this game. But like you said, Alex, they're timely. They get it done when they need to, and that a lot of times is all that matters. They could have come out after that, third quarter touchdown by Western Colorado and had another 3 and out, but they said, all right, no, we got to keep ourselves in this one. And they came out and had like a 7 or 9 play drive. It was just beautiful and capped it off with a touchdown. So it's been good enough. They're getting by. They're winning games. It's hard to nitpick when you're, one of the last 8 teams standing in the country. You don't want to sound too negative about a team that's playing in that game. So,
yeah. And a lot of players too. I think I mentioned this last time, but I'll mention again because they do bring it up. They brought it off after the win too. Bubba did, I believe. Sam has that calming presence on the sideline. He really, and that is kind of a reflection of the team, like you were talking about earlier. They could have lied down and said, we're down 2 scores, whatever. You come out and score. They could have said, well, we just had a turnover on downs. 3 minutes, less than 4 minutes left in the game. It's it might be wraps. They just kind of ignore that sort of thing, and it really, Sam is kind of a reflection of it. It sounds like, obviously, I'm not one of the guys on the field there, but it's what they've said a lot, and it can sound like locker room speech, but they really do play like it, and I think that's kind of an underrated aspect of him, I guess.
Yeah, and it's been huge too because as we've talked about all season, he had some big shoes to fill. That's not an easy act to follow, following Brandon Alt, and I mean it's just a different offense, and we've talked about that all year long, but. Again, just been able to make the plays, and we've kind of beat this over a dead horse now, but they've made the plays they needed to make, and they've just been able to do the things that are required of them to win. It's a little bit greasier, a little bit slimier. One could say, Ian brought up the Vikings earlier. I'll bring up the Chargers. It's a little bit of Charger football. We're going to play defense. We're going to play time of possession. It's not going to be pretty, but all of a sudden you're going to look up at the scoreboard in the fourth quarter and go, how in the world is Bemidji State winning this football game? And that's kind of what it was like for the Beavers over these last few weeks. So it's fun. It's a different kind of fun than what Bemidji State had before, where we spread everybody out and we're whipping the ball around the field and we're doing stuff. It's a lot more running back focused, a lot more kind of trying to outmuscle teams, and it's fun. And you're going to have to play a team that likes to do the exact same thing, but also has a good wide receiver like Bemidji State did. I think now's a good time to start talking about Mankato and that matchup. It was a wide receiver showcase for both teams' wide receiver ones back in early September when I think it was like 80 degrees down in Mankato. It's going to be 8 on Saturday, a little bit different atmosphere, but Mankato's no stranger to playing in these kind of football games. Bemidji State playing in the biggest game in program history for the football team. Alex, what's kind of the general vibe you've gotten out of the team a couple days away from the kickoff in Mankato?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it there. Last time they played, it was kind of a shootout, it was a back and forth game. It was an offensive game, and I highly doubt it's going to play out like that. And one thing that kind of touched that Coach Ford, the defensive coordinator, told me on the phone the other day is, and I didn't really remember it, they had a lot of 3rd and long situations, right? Like they had a lot of situations where the defense did what they wanted to do. They did what they're great at, is got them behind the chains and then force them to, do a 3rd and long pass conversion. And then you have, the defense, the pass rushers pinning back their ears and blitzing the QB. And they just kind of converted on those big plays. And that's not really a characteristic of this defense now. They don't allow those big plays. That just doesn't happen anymore. So I don't think it's going to play out the same defensively. And obviously Bemidji State is a different team than it was 3 months ago, I think. I think pretty quickly they realized that the offensive identity and defensive identity of this team was going to be a little bit different than it had in previous years. But now I think they've really gotten comfortable with that identity. I think they're playing into it. They know what they are. And that's an underrated aspect of football to compare it to my home state here. Michigan just upset Ohio State. You knew the identity of Michigan. They're going to run the ball, and you know what they're going to do. They're going to have stout defense, and they're going to run the ball down your throat. And when you know what you are as a team, I think that helps. And I think Bemidji State knows what they are heading this matchup. It knows that it lost by just 2 points last time they played on a last-second field goal. I mean, obviously, if you're at this point in the playoffs, there's not going to be a lot of doubt. But this is a group of guys that really feel like they can get it back here against Mankato.
Absolutely. And you look at that game and you see, like you said, there was just a couple plays where it's like, Trayshawn Watson was able to get behind the defense a few times. And if they can prevent that from happening, that's just such a different game, and you lose by 2 in a game where you do that. You've got to feel pretty confident. They're back home. They're in Minnesota. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of Beaver fans. There was plenty of Beaver fans at the first game that went down to Mankato to see that one. I'm sure there's going to be plenty at this one as well, myself and CJ and Alex included. We will all be there. Yeah, exactly. So I think that this is exactly what you want. And, you look at teams like the Beavers, and like you said, their identity offensively has changed to a little bit more of a run-heavy offense. And the run didn't get quite as well as we wanted to against Western Colorado. But if they can do that well, that'll help them in cold weather playoff games. I don't think it's supposed to be, like we talked about, it was 9 degrees the last time the Beavers had a playoff game in Minnesota. Well, actually, it was probably warmer than that last year in Bemidji, but that game against Winona State, it's hard to throw the ball in 9-degree weather when the wind is whipping off Lake Bemidji like that. And we saw that in the first half of that game that the Beavers played against Winona. Brandon Alt had a couple of picks. Score was 0-0 at halftime, and then the Beavers came out in the second half and really exploded. But I think the run game can really help in a colder weather. I don't know if there's snow in the forecast, but the Beavers being better at running the ball and like not feeling like they have to completely abandon that part of their game plan in most games this season is such a benefit to games like this late in the season. I just can't wait for this one to get started. I do have a question. I was wondering, I kind of looked at it because I thought it would be a little closer. And I thought last year, they had to do the thing where they decide whether it's going to be in Bemidji or whether it's going to be in Central Washington. Both of these teams were unseeded, but it seemed like right from the get-go, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to Mankato. So I don't know if it was just because there's a clear like head-to-head. Both of these teams went 8-3. They're both unseeded and they had a head-to-head. We're giving it to Mankato since they won that head-to-head. That, I assume that's what happened. I don't know if you have any more insight on why the game is being played in Mankato.
Yeah, I believe they went with the head-to-head. I think they were just like, these teams are relatively similar. Let's give it, that type of thing.
That was my assumption, which is unfortunate and fortunate at the same time for myself, somewhat selfishly. I'm half as close to Minnesota State, about an hour-and-a-half drive, compared to about a 3.5-hour drive to Bemidji. So for me, I'm not hating, but
I'm complaining much further drive for me.
Yeah, hey, I don't care.
I forget this too. They ended up playing the 1 seed in the bracket, so I think it was just kind of that as well. We're just kind of played out because I don't think they reseed really or shuffle too much until the Final Four, because then they'll reseed there. But until then, it's not. I don't think. Yeah, because I was looking at the bracket and I'm eyeing Fair State in the 4th, and I was talking to a couple people today, and they were like, no, it can be reseeded. So if someone on the other side wins, I think there's another unseeded team, if they end up making it, that it's not necessarily Fair State, because Fair State's a terrifying team, right? That would be an interesting
78,
team.
78-17 winners, by the way, in a second round playoff game.
10 rushing touchdowns, I think it was too.
Yeah. Hey, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. But
let's get as far as we can before we get to play it.
Let somebody else try to do that before we have to
play that dragon first.
But hey, we got to slay the Mankato dragon first. So hopefully we're not getting too far ahead of ourselves. But yes, cheer hard for Virginia Union this week, the other unseeded team, so that we might have a chance to avoid Ferris State if we should get there. But yeah, I think that this game against Minnesota State is going to be fun. And I don't think the home field advantage is that big of a detractor because, like I said, this game's still in Minnesota, and there's plenty of Beaver faithful that are going to be down there creating plenty of noise for the Beavers in this
Plus,
game.
they've been down there. They know exactly what it's like to go win in Mankato.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they haven't won in Mankato in a while, but what was it, like 2016 when they did it last, I believe?
Yeah. That was kind of like the first statement win of Bolte's tenure because he was interim head coach that year, and they come down to Mankato. Nobody quite knows how good that team was going to be, but I remember the vibe on campus that like Saturday night when everyone's like, oh my gosh, did you see? They didn't just like squeak out a win against Mankato. That was a multiple touchdown win where they just came in there, beat the brakes off them, and came home. And I think everybody kind of knew that the football program with Bolte was going to be going in a good direction. And I mean, people probably already knew that from the outside looking in. It was a very good thing. So yeah, it's been a while since they've won in Mankato. I don't believe they've beaten Mankato at the Chet, although they were close last year for homecoming. I was at that game, and Bemidji State had a couple chances to win, got behind, and just kind of had to play catch up. And that's the thing with how this team is built this year for Bemidji State. I know they were behind last week and managed to win, but you can't account on 70-some yard pick scoop and scores to bail you out. If you get behind by Mankato by 10 points in the second half, it's going to be tough. This is a Mankato team that is built to run the ball and get a lead early and kind of run away and hide from you. And if you're Bemidji State, making sure that you are not losing going into halftime is going to be a huge, huge thing for this team.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just keeping things close. That's what I told Jared, the editor, when we were talking about it earlier this week. He's like, what do you think the key to the game is? Keep it ugly. Keep it a gross game. You know what I mean? Bemidji State thrives in that. They thrive in those games where there's not a lot of yardage. There's some weird plays. There's some special teams. They like those situations where it's close. And I will say Minnesota State is good in those situations too. I mean, they've won multiple games on last-second field goals. Believe they beat Augie last week on a last-second field goal, beat Bemidji State on a last-second field goal. So that's another team that kind of – it's like two teams going at each other who both just kind of find a way to win in the fourth quarter. And I would bet good money that it's going to be a close game. I think I said this last week too. I'll say it again. Heading this fourth quarter, wouldn't be surprised if it's tied up, a one-possession game. It's going to be close, and it's going to be a matter of what team is able to do what they've been both doing all season and find just some way to win, whether that's a 79-yard scoop and score, whether that's just stout defense and getting enough from McGath, maybe an explosive play or something. It's going to be who can get it first.
Yeah. Last 2 weeks in a row for Mankato, game-winning field goals as time expires against Augustana in the first round and then against CSU Pueblo.
An onside kick against Augustana.
Yeah, they made an onside kick, and then last week against CSU Pueblo, I think they made a kick late to tie the game.
And all of a sudden, I watched on the stream, and they had the ball. And
I'm like, why do they have the ball back, guys? Like, what is happening here? And it turns out that I think the Pueblo quarterback threw an untimely pick late in that game to give Mankato the ball back, which is good for the Beavers because now they get to play in Minnesota and against a familiar opponent. But yeah, I think that this is a matchup, like you said, Alex, that dude, I hate making a ton of Charger references, but it's crazy how similar like these teams are. Like you said, they like to win ugly football games. They don't care about your box score, right? We don't care about your fantasy Bemidji State football team. As long as we come away with the W, it doesn't matter, like it's unbelievable. This team has been able to pull out some of those wins this year. And I think that this team is a lot better than their, if you follow Gopher football Division I level, it's kind of been the same way. Like they went 7-5, but there's a lot of those games that, they go one different direction and the Gophers are now a 9-3 team instead of 7-5. That's the same with this Bemidji State football team, and the thing about that is, those two plays, the kick against Minnesota State, if that misses, it doesn't make the Beavers a different football team. It just gives them a different record. So this team is still a very good football team that is maybe a little bit underseeded because of one or two plays here over the course of the season. And of course, those can go the other way. If they don't get that fumble return for a touchdown, they're not in this game. So it goes both ways. But I still think this is a team that absolutely deserves to be here and can absolutely do this against Minnesota State this week.
I think really what it's going to come down to for this, and again, we're going to get it's going to be very cliched, but you got to win the turnover battle. And Bemidji State, with some of the stuff they had necessarily, I don't, with the way the punt went and the safety and something, I don't quite technically count that way, or a turnover on downs, but Bemidji State had some turnovers in that game, and they were able to overcome that with a turnover of their own and great defense. But I think, again, McGath can make some great plays and make some great off-script plays and do some of that. There was also an interception in that game that, maybe was a bit of it, I think coaches, and I think he'll tell you, was an ill-advised pass. And you take the good with the bad, and the good has certainly outweighed the bad this year. So I'm not trying to bring him down or anything, but you just can't afford that. You can't afford a random fluky, fumbles are fluky, I think, generally speaking, especially when it's a good football team. Fumbles sometimes just happen, and teams more than ever trying to, what do they call it, peanut punch that football out of there. So like, it's just kind of how, anyway, the point is you got to watch out for the turnover battle. Whichever team wins the turnover battle, whichever team is winning going into halftime, I think is in the driver's seat to win this game, and likely does win this game. And it sounds super cliche because obviously, but that's when it's going to come down to two well-coached teams that know each other a lot.
Yeah, and you touched on like kind of going along with that, again, kind of a stereotypical thing. I mentioned it last week again, but special teams too have to be in a team like this, in a game like this. It's hard pressed that you're going to win when you have a safety, or when you have a kind of a punting gaff like they did that set up a touchdown, right? Like turnovers and the special teams units, you're going to have to be sharp. And not talking field goal units right now, because Mantelli has been booting it lately. He's continued to play really well there, but just make sure you're executing on just kind of those simple things, maybe even kick returns, because after they fumble recovered for a touchdown, the kick return unit let up I think it was like a 50-yard return, let up something where it's like, okay, now they're in range again, or they're close to midfield. So just tighten up those things and just don't give away free points. Yeah,
absolutely. My cliche is that I think we have to score more points than Mankato to win this football game.
I
think it's absolutely possible.
Say time of possession.
Oh yeah, time. We got to win time of possession. Yep. Dang it! How do we miss that one? Yeah. But honestly, that's going to be so true. How do you stop Mankato from getting a ton of big plays and giving them opportunities to make big plays? The run game's got to be going. You got to find opportunities to bleed clock at every different, venue of the game, and do it with hopefully a lead. Hopefully you get out to a quick start in this game, make a big play, get out to a good start, and then control the ball, control the clock. You see it in basketball a lot. I know, like, make them play your game. And it's a little harder when you've got two different units that come out onto the field, three, if you include special teams, but, you see a lot in basketball and in hockey too. Make them play the way that you want to play, dictate the flow of the game. Like you said, Alex, make it ugly. There was a ton of penalties at one point in that game last week. But some teams, that's what you want. Hey, a little bit ugly. We don't care.
Get down in the mud with us.
Right. So I think both of these teams like to play like that, and it's going to be a very interesting game. Two teams are very familiar with each other, meeting NSIC in the national quarterfinals. You can't ask for anything better this weekend in Mankato, I think.
Yeah, and you've also got the drama. I talked to some of the guys today, and it does, it's hard to make an Elite Eight game mean a little bit more. And, coaches and some of them were a little coy with them, but some of the players are pretty honest, saying beating Mankato would be pretty sweet. It'd be pretty sweet that that's the team you knock out. Like, it's a pretty incredible draw that you get that team, the team that beat you by a field goal, that you felt like you're going to win, a team that they were telling me earlier in the regular season, that's a team they circle during the regular season because they're the cream of the NSIC. They're consistently one of the better programs. I mean, to get that draw in Elite Eight, it's Sportswriter's dream, right? It's the perfect matchup. It's narratives. It should be entertaining.
It should be. And yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of like, if you're on the cynical side, it's like, great. Like, if you lose this game, it's got to be to Mankato and they're going to never let you, whatever. But I don't have that mindset. Sorry, that's a loser mentality. We are not thinking that way. We are thinking like those players are. That's a great opportunity to go down and to beat those guys. And as we talk about, Mankato fans do a lot of talking on social media, Ian, So it'd be really great if Bemidji State could maybe silence them for a couple days on the old Bird app.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you brought up a good point, CJ. It's like, with it being Mankato, it's like, oh my gosh, dude, Mankato's going to get the opportunity to beat us again. And I, you know what, to make a Michigan State connection, back in 2019, I'm looking at Selection Sunday and the bracket comes out and Michigan State's got to go through Zion Williamson and Duke, a team that they like. Izzo cannot get past Coach K in March Madness. You can't do it until you can. Like they say that in the NFL a lot. Kyle Shanahan can't win a Super Bowl. Okay. Until one day he can't. Like the Chiefs 8 years ago were a loser franchise. They had never won a Super Bowl. They were the team that blew that crazy lead in the playoffs to Andrew Luck. You can't be a great team until you are. And then all of a sudden, none of that matters anymore. Bemidji State can't beat Mankato. They haven't beat Mankato since 2016. I think it's 5 straight losses now. All 3 of the last years have been crazy close games. CJ, we talked about it as one of our first ever episodes of R&B. The team comes out against Mankato, plays one of the worst first halves of football I've ever seen. They played so much better in the second half. And then it was just one drive for Mankato that ended up winning them the game at the end. But it's like we had that game at our fingertips. The homecoming game 2 years ago, they came right down to the end and they lost. This game this last year came down to a last-second field goal. Bemidji State can't beat them until they can. And I think that is this weekend. And I think Bemidji State upsets. They're pretty evenly ranked, but it goes into Mankato.
The road team.
Yeah, they're the road team. So yeah, upsets Mankato and gets to the national semifinal.
Oh my gosh, that'd be so awesome. By the way, that's our first episode of Beaver Banter. R&B was
did I say R&B? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Beaver Banter. Once we came back.
There were still some good times with that football program there, but I mean, just from that moment back in the 2017s, the 2018s, 2019s, even when Alt was on the team and there was still kind of like what this team could become was starting to break through. It took a little bit just to kind of, again, build the program, and Bolte still was relatively new as head coach. I know he'd been on staff, but just to get the program in the way he wanted and to build it up into the things that they needed to do from where it is there. And we thought it was in a good spot back then to where it is now. It is a much different program, and that's no slight to the guys that were on that team. There were some good players on those teams, but just from where it was then to where it is now is just remarkable, and it's awesome. And again, this season's a success no matter what, but go make it even sweeter by going to beat Mankato. I think that's the biggest thing out of all this that we can take away. It's going to be a fun environment. We are going to be down there. We don't quite know what we'll do in terms of, content wise, but for sure, follow all the socials, follow the Discord, do all that stuff. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're going to be posting lots of stuff and getting ready for what will be the biggest game in Bemidji State football history. I think we've exhausted every angle from this game that we can. I think I would try and pull the group and say, what do we think is more sustainable? The wide receiver from Mankato, whose name escapes me, going off on the game he did, or Bryce Peters. I'm going to take Bryce just because he's a friend of the podcast. He's our guy. And I'm going to guess the room is going to go with that as well. So let's talk a little basketball. Bemidji State men's and women's basketball, they've gotten the seasons going. Non-conference schedule pretty much wrapped up as everybody starts to focus on the NSIC, which I believe starts this weekend, Alex. You had a chance to watch a little bit of men's and women's basketball. Let's start off on the men's side. This is a team that sneakily has a little expectations this year.
Yeah, you've got some returning player. He hasn't played yet this season, John Sutherland, but he's back. Should be back relatively soon. Don't have any info on that, to be honest. But he should be back. And you've got a lot of really good transfers on this men's team, honestly. A lot have been playing really well. And it's a team that, I have yet to watch NSIC basketball, so I don't really know how it plays out. But just kind of looking at the non-conference play, they dropped a couple of tough ones with the non-con. Like they kind of blew a lead in the first half. This road game against Florida, they played Lynn and Barry, I think were the two. And Barry, they led at halftime and ended up losing 70-67 in the last few minutes. And then kind of just fell apart the next day, I guess. But there were some certainly flashes, and especially without John Sutherland, your best player in the team, you've kind of gotten to see a look at some guys who, I don't know, see what they can do without the leading scorers, see who can kind of step up in his absence. So it's been interesting, and kind of, I guess, the true proving ground is obviously going to be the conference. So.
Yeah. Very interesting to see what happens when Sutherland gets back. The last couple of years have kind of been built on that post play in the in and out game, or inside out game, I should say, where you dump it down, get some good solid 3-point shooters along the arc, and hope that you can just score a bunch, out rebound a bunch of teams, and hopefully when Sutherland gets back, they can kind of get back to that. But yeah, I haven't paid a ton of attention. I've just been kind of box score watching. It's hard to do because a lot of these games have been on the road, so it's hard to watch them. And then, what can you really take from a 105-62 win over University of Minnesota Morris, outside of seeing what some of those younger guys and role players are going to do?
They didn't have Oak Hills on the schedule this year.
No Oak Hills. So
no Oak Hills. Were they getting that NDSU game scheduled back again?
I don't know, man. Yeah, that was brutal. I don't know if you even know about this, like, little school, Alex, Oak Hills Academy or whatever.
Oak Hills Christian College. It's a little Bible college just outside of Bemidji, and they would play the Beavers because close by. And then NDSU had a school drop on them last second, and Oak Hills agreed to fill in the void, and that's how you got one of the most lopsided college basketball wins of all time.
Yeah, I don't
Jared
know what
showed me that box score.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad.
Look, it's a credit to those dudes from Oak Hills. It's just a bunch of dudes who want to hoop. So, like, they got to go out and hoop and play against a D1 basketball team, but they're going to have to live with that for a while.
Yeah, but yeah.
That's kind
one person who's kind of stuck out, I guess, in the absence of John Sutherland, kind of so far, I guess, early is Malang Athian. He's a transfer from Baltimore Shores, I think, or Maryland Shores out east, and kind of just landed here, and he's been really effective. He's kind of a three-way scorer. He kind of they don't really have like a true 4 or 5, I guess. They kind of play a little bit with that, but he's more of like a power forward, kind of a stretch forward type of guy, and he's been pretty electric in scoring. I mean, he can score. He can shoot the 3 ball pretty darn well, and he can drive the rim. He can also kind of like have some post play a little bit in the paint. So kind of just a well-rounded scorer, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he kind of plugs in. If like when Sutherland comes back, Sutherland plays the 5, Athian plays the 4, and you just kind of have 2 dynamic scorers in the front court. I think that's going to be one of the more interesting things I'm looking for coming into NSIC play. I think he's averaging, got the stats up right here, he's averaging over 14 points a game right now. Pretty darn good. And another guy I guess I want to shout out real quick is John Pekarich. I think he's from Brainerd. He's a sophomore. He's playing off the bench. He's coming and shooting 3 ball well too. He's kind of just the guy who just comes in and can rip off a few, and coming off the bench right now, he is averaging 9 points a game. So I don't know. It's too early to really make any proclamations about the team, but it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch a couple of transfers and some kind of area kids, I guess, step up in the absence of Sutherland.
Yeah. Never trust those guys that come from Brainerd. Go in and tell your boss that, Alex.
make a little mention of it.
They said those Brainerd guys are bad news. That's that's the lesson to take away, I guess. I don't know. All in good fun, but it's really cool to see some of those guys step up. I know obviously they got some local guys. I mean, Sutherland being from Grand Rapids, Pekarich being from Brainerd, and then Tate Olson coming from New York Mills is another one to throw in that mix. That's relatively close to the Bemidji, within a couple hours of Bemidji. So it's fun to see some of those local guys step up, and I'm sure there's a couple I'm missing. But yeah, no, I mean, this is a team that should be, I think, towards the upper half of the NSIC. This is a team that last year, I think, underperformed a little bit, especially, and maybe they overperformed the year before, and maybe it kind of evened out over the last couple seasons. But, Alex, this was a team a couple of years ago that was one buzzer beater away from going to the NSIC championship game in the tournament and having a chance to get into March. And that relatively a lot of that same team was back a year ago, didn't quite come together, but there's still a lot of good pieces on this basketball team. It'll be really fun to see when they can get things going. And obviously this weekend will be that first test for NSIC basketball, which is a lot of fun. It's a slept on basketball conference, but there's some really good teams. Augustana has been a good program forever. Mankato, I guess, won the national championship, but I don't really want to give them credit for anything. There have been Northern States had some good basketball teams.
Moorhead's had a good run here over the last few years too. Yeah, so
exactly. Yeah. It's a fun basketball conference, so it should be good when that stuff gets going. Quickly, let's wrap things up Women's basketball, obviously things are going there and getting close to their first set of conference games. Didn't have a ton of non-conference games for the women this year outside of the Michigan road trip. Pretty much kept it in-house with, with I think Valley City and Morris and things like that. But what's kind of the outlook for this season for that crew?
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit of a rebuilding year, I think. And Coach has been Chelsea's been pretty honest about that, I guess. And they installed a new offense this offseason. They've got a lot of really young players. It's a pretty darn young team. And that's the one thing that stuck out. The only game I've covered this year was against that Valley City State, and it was a win. They ended up winning, but Chelsea Stoltenberg afterwards, she was like, we're still kind of looking for that leading score, kind of that go-to girl. I think they've got a couple of good pieces. They're pretty decent in the front court. And then Erin Barrett she's a senior, and she was kind of pegged as the NSIC preseason player of the year for BSU, the player to watch for BSU specifically. And she's not really like she can score for sure, but she's more kind of an off-ball guard type of person who does a lot of really good things well, but maybe isn't like the primary scorer of the team. So I think they're still going to be looking for that. They had a freshman, Aubrey Hayer, I believe. She ended up scoring like pretty good amount of points. I think it was 19 the other day. So, I mean, there's some interesting again, it's going to be a rebuilding year, and you're going to have to kind of just play how it goes. But she's been really impressive. They got a couple of younger kids too. I don't know. It's hard to predict how they're going to end up, but I think it's going to be maybe they get better as the season goes on. Maybe they find that girl that they can go to who ends up being the scorer.
Yeah, and you mentioned
for now it's kind of just see how the team progresses, I guess.
Yeah, and you mentioned how that offense is going to look, or you said new look offense, I guess. Has Coach Stoltenberg kind of gotten into you on what that's going to look like or what that entails, or is it just, hey, new offense, we're kind of figuring some things out? Because before it always felt like Bemidji State wanted to play a very slow, very controlled, very like deliberate style of offense. Is that kind of changing, or I guess what intact, or do you know that's going to change?
That is a good question. I am not sure yet. That's kind of the thing we're going to have to see. Yeah, as it goes. I did notice, at least in the game that I covered, there was a lot of play in the post. Like they had a lot of, and they have kind of some depth there. So maybe just kind of if they continue what you're saying, kind of that slower pace, maybe they get in the post more. I guess that would be a question. But yeah, that. Not entirely clear yet, to be quite honest.
It also depends, too, because you're playing those non-conference teams. You're going to get some matchups. You're going to do whatever. Yeah, it always felt like Bemidji State has had a couple of those forwards on the women's basketball team that you could get the ball down low to, and you could do some of that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see. I know that they were a team that did not take a lot of three-point shots, and it'll be interesting to see if that volume goes up, if it stays the same, if it kind of changes where it's at. A lot of stuff there that's going to change with women's basketball. And like you said, a rebuilding year, trying to figure some things out and kind of reload. It's unfortunate because I think, Coach Stoltenberg really had a team that they liked a few years ago, and COVID hit and really messed up kind of that core group that they had. And they've really been trying to find that group of women again. And it'll be interesting to see if we can kind of find a couple pieces to get back on that right path. Ian, anything else in basketball you want to ask Alex while we got him here?
No, I think we've covered everything that I was interested in hearing. I'm curious to see. I'm excited to see when we really start diving deeper into this team, usually, at or around the holiday break, once the fall sports have kind of officially wrapped up. So for football, 3 weeks from now, when they wrap up their season. But yeah, hopefully we can get some more success from these teams this year and get at least the men's team back in the Pentagon. Alex, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Pentagon, but I
just learned it because I was talking to, I think, Erin Barrett before the season, and she said, yeah, we're trying to go to the Pentagon. I was like,
trying to do
why you'd want to be there. Be the last place I'd want to be right now. What are you talking about?
Yeah, the Sanford Pentagon, where they host the electrifying couple-day tournament, the NSIC quarterfinal, semifinal, and championship rounds. It was cool last year, or a couple years ago. The Beavers men's team got to go down there and play some games. It was fun to watch. So hopefully we can get both of those teams back in the building.
I believe the Pentagon in Sioux Falls is where we got that GIF of the refs, and I can't remember. It's like the one where it looks like they're. I got to find it because it's one of the, like, people use it whenever there's like a bad officiated game. I can't remember. It's like they're, I got to find it. This is going to kill me. It's like, I can't remember what the refs are specifically doing. Basically, it's like whenever you're accusing the refs of having a bad game, and they just kind of use this gif of refs. I don't know if they're like shaking hands.
Interesting.
But it looks like it's at the Pentagon, so I gotta find it now, and I probably won't have enough time to find it before this episode.
One of the best things about college hoops is just like the little Feast Week tournaments, the barns that they play in, like the Maui Invitational. It's just a little gym down there in Hawaii that, these massive programs are playing games at, shoving these, and then they go to the Final Four and it's like a football stadium with 100,000 people inside of it. It's just such a stark contrast. So
you get to see Tom Izzo in a Hawaiian shirt every year thanks to that Maui tournament.
Yeah, that's always a sight to see.
And then a quick aside too, you mentioned that maybe in the past the 3-ball hasn't been super important for this women's team, but I'm looking right now. Taryn Plash is shooting 47% from 3, and then Aubrey, who's that freshman I mentioned, she's shooting 417. So maybe they've got a little bit of production from beyond the arc, kind of stepping up. A couple of girls who could, and it seems like Aubrey is kind of like an effective scorer. That might be kind of her thing. So she's pretty young again, but that could be an interesting to see how she grows, and maybe she can become one of those go-to scorers, I guess, as the season progresses.
Yeah, a lot of stuff to see. I mean, it's gonna be fun to see who those players are and who kind of steps up and takes some of these mantles. It'll be really fun to see as the winter goes on. Alex, we've picked your brain a lot. We appreciate you for coming on, talking football, talking men's and women's basketball. We for sure will do this at some point again for football to wrap up a season. Hopefully not next week, hopefully later in the future. Hopefully next week we're talking about a semifinal appearance, but also coming in to talk basketball as well, which I'm sure we'll have you on later in the winter to do that. So Alex, where can people check your workout at the Pioneer?
Yeah, just pioneer.com or at Alex Pick Faber on Twitter. That's where I tweet out most of my stories, and that's where you get spammed by my live updates for tweets for all the games, and it's going to be for hoop season 2. So yeah, that's where I primarily put everything out.
Alex Faber, Bemidji Pioneer sports writer, joining us on the Beaver Banter podcast. Alex, appreciate the time, and we'll see you down in Mankato, man.
Yeah, see you there, guys.
All right, this has been the Beaver Banter podcast. One more time, Ian. One more time.
Horns down.
One more time. Horns down. Horns down. It's like that picture of the guy who's at the grocery store and that kid's in like the shopping cart basket. He's just like find a way to edit.
I will be doing that. I will be doing that to many people before the game.
Many young children will be berated by Ian with the Horns down logo. It'll be perfect. All right, we'll see you guys next time.